think you're good to start.
Hi, everyone. All right. I am Rida Mukhtar, Research Associate at Center for Labor Research, Pakistan. Thank you for joining us in this auspicious launching event of Fairwork Pakistan Report, which looks at the labor standards in the platform economy. Pakistan Ratings 2022 is the first ever report published by the Fairwork Pakistan team. And this particular report encompasses the labor standards in Pakistan's location-based gig or platform economy in accordance with the Fairwork principles. And this focuses on highlighting the issues this sector is facing, essentially part of the informal economy, and exploring avenues to improve the working conditions in the gig economy. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the Fairwork project. This project is basically based at the Oxford Internet Institute, University of Oxford, and the WZB Berlin Social Science Center. And this project evaluates the working conditions of digital labor platforms through its global team of researchers. And we are proud members of the Fairwork team, working hand in hand to remove the disparity among the gig economy workers. Special thanks to Richard Hicks, who is Fairwork Pakistan lead, and who exceedingly supported the Pakistan Fairwork team while the study was being conducted here. Under our principal investigator, Iftikhar Ahmad Sahib, CLR would also like to thank the platforms, their managers and workers who helped us in the smooth collection of the data for this report. Today in our presenting team, we have with us Richard Hicks from the Central Fairwork team. Secondly, we have with us Shanza Sohail. She is Senior Research Associate at CLR. And further, Mr. Iftikhar Ahmad, founder of Center for Labor Research. Iftikhar Ahmad is a comparative labor law expert, and he is member of Labor Expert Group and has worked with the government of Pakistan, Ministry of Overseas Pakistanis and Human Resource Development as an advisor on the labor market and legislative reform issues. Well, talking about Center for Labor Research, it is an independent non-profit organization based in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, and it works on comparative labor issues. And it's also the Global Labor Law Office of Wage Indicator Foundation. Together with Wage Indicator Foundation, it has published its first de jure labor rights index, comparing labor legislation in 115 countries. And we are currently revising the index, and the 2022 edition will be launched, which will include 135 countries. Center has also published an Islamic Labor Code, a blueprint for legislative reform in Muslim majority countries based on teachings of Quran and Sunnah. Let me introduce our panel today. On our panel here, we are being accompanied by Dr. Alia Hashmi, labor economist, Mr. Zahoor Awan, worker member of ILO governing body, Raja Fazul Hassan Faz Sahib, former Central Labor Law Advisor, Yasin Aslam, President ADCU UK, Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali, lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, Mutahir Khan, tech columnist at Dawn, and Azhar Malik, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Overseas Pakistanis and Human Resource Development. Warm welcome and thanks to all of them. Before moving on to the report presentation, I would quickly like to go through a few of the housekeeping rules and would humbly request all of the participants to follow the conduction of this webinar. I'll be really grateful if you can stick to these. The first thing is this event is being recorded and will be posted on Fairwork website, Fairwork YouTube channel following this event. And also the webinar will consist of firstly the report presentation by Pakistan Fairwork, which will be followed by panel discussion on the report, where each speaker will speak for 7 minutes, and there will be Q&A section at the end of the webinar. You can write your questions in the Zoom Q&A section. We'll try to follow up on all questions and leftovers later on, inshallah. One thing to be mentioned is please try to keep the questions concise and to the point, since they're visible to all the attendees. A humble request, if you can, all the speakers here can take care of the time limit since a webinar duration is strictly 90 minutes and webinar hashtag is Fairwork Pakistan. Now, without further delay, we'll be starting the presentations formally with the introduction of Fairwork project by Richard Hicks. He's Professor of Digital Development in Global Development Institute at the University of Manchester, UK, and is currently Fairwork lead for Indonesia, Pakistan, and South Africa. Please, Richard, you may start.
Thanks very much indeed. Let me just share my screen for you. And I hope that's all showing up okay. So thanks very much, Rita, for that introduction. Today, as she said, we're here to mark the release of the very first set of Fairwork ratings for Pakistan, which are going to establish a baseline on the country's platform economy that will be updated in coming years. This year, we've evaluated 7 platforms in total: ride-hailing, in food delivery, in courier, and in domestic services sectors, against 5 principles of fair work, and we've given each of the platforms a score out of 10 based on the pay and conditions for their workers. What we're hoping here is that these scores are going to raise awareness of the conditions of gig workers in Pakistan, help consumers and workers and regulators to calibrate the practices of platforms, also for the platforms themselves to create a more level playing field, and in general to help develop a world of fair platform work. Just to give you a little bit of detail about Fair Work overall, we're a growing network of researchers currently rating platforms in 37 countries across 5 continents. In all of those countries, Fair Work collaborates closely with workers, platforms, advocates, policymakers, and we have the aim overall of showing that better and fairer jobs are possible in the platform economy. As I said, there are 5 Fair Work principles behind our work. These are what we see as basic tenets that must be fulfilled for platform work to be categorized as fair. And these principles have been developed in close collaboration with worker representatives, platforms, policymakers, who all came together in sessions at the International Labour Organization. Let me just explain the principles in a little bit more depth, the 5 of them. So we have fair pay, that workers, irrespective of their employment classification, should earn a decent income after taking account of work-related costs and active hours earned. Fair conditions requires that platforms should protect workers from the risks arising from their work. Third one is fair contracts, meaning that terms and conditions should be transparent and accessible to workers, subject to local legal jurisdiction, not imposing unfair terms on workers. Fair management says that there should be documented due process for decisions affecting workers, and there should be measures to avoid discrimination. And the final one is fair representation, meaning that platforms should provide a documented process through which worker voice can be expressed, and so enabling independent collective bodies of workers to have some meaningful say in their conditions of work. So these 5 Fair Work principles form the basis for how we score the platforms. Each of those 5 principles is broken down into 2 points. A first point, then a second point that can only be awarded if the first point's been fulfilled, and therefore every platform gets a score out of 10. Platforms only being given a point where there is evidence of meeting the criteria for a principle. So failing to achieve a point doesn't necessarily mean that a platform doesn't comply with the principle in question. It simply means we are unable to evidence its compliance. So how do we calculate those scores? Fair Work Project uses 3 approaches to measure fairness at work. The process starts with desk research to ascertain which platforms are operational, noting particularly the largest, the most influential ones, and we include all of those, and then we gather public information relating to those platforms in relation to the principles. Second method involves approaching the platforms for evidence. We interact with platform managers and we request evidence for each of the Fair Work principles. Third method is to interview platform workers directly. We aim for a sample of between 6 and 10 worker interviews for each of the platform. Important point, the interviews are not aiming to build a representative, a statistically significant sample. Instead, what we're helping us to do is have a deep dive to understand how work is undertaken, how work is managed on the platform. And then we put together all of these 3 forms of evidence, and our Pakistan team collectively ascertained the scores from that evidence. Those scores that we came up with are then peer reviewed by a member of the Central Fair Work team and by 2 reviewers from other Fair Work country teams. So that ensures we have consistency and rigor in the scoring process. As I noted, points are only awarded if clear evidence exists for each of our thresholds. So I hope that's given you a little bit of a background about Fairwork as an overall international program and some of the specifics about how we actually operate. I'll now hand over to Shanza to discuss the specific findings from this year's work in Pakistan.
Thank you so much for the introduction to the Fairwork project. Let's move on to the presentation of the findings of the report by Shanza Sohail. She is Senior Research Associate at Center for Labor Research and has an MPhil in Development Studies from PIDE. Also, she is involved in comparative labor law research at CLR. Please, Shanza, share with us the findings of that one.
Hello everyone, I'm Shanza Sohail, part of the Fairwork team at Center for Labor Research, and I will be discussing the findings of our report, Pakistan Ratings 2022. But I would like to start with the Fairwork Pakistan team first. The Fairwork project is coordinated from the Oxford Internet Institute and the WZB Berlin Social Science Center. And the Fairwork organization has entrusted the Center for Labor Research in Pakistan with implementing its pilot project here. The Center for Labor Research, or CLR, is a non-profit organization registered with SECP and promotes awareness on fundamental labor rights. We collected data from September 2021 to January 2022 for this project. And this project has been implemented in the twin cities of Islamabad and Rawalpindi by the CLR team, which includes Iftikhar Ahmad, Shanza Sohail, Athar Jamil, Sidar Nizamuddin, Simab Haider, Zoya Wahid, Sarah Shifan, Aisha Kiran, Shabana Malik, under the supervision of Richard Heeks and Mark Graham. Okay, moving on to our findings. Okay, so this league table presented here on the right, it represents the scores for the 7 platforms that we evaluated for this year's scoring. As you can see that none of the platforms performed well, with only 3 platforms being able to show that they fulfilled the basic criteria to gain a point. 4 of the 7 platforms, they have scored 0, with only 3 platforms, that is FoodPanda, Gharpar, and Uber, scoring only 1 point each. Fair, there was only Gharpar, which guaranteed at least a minimum wage. Under fair conditions, there was only Uber, which provides workers with an effective safety net. And under fair contracts, there is only FoodPanda, which provides clear and transparent terms and conditions for its workers. So moving on to a little more detail in the key findings. Under fair pay, only 1 platform, Gharpar, could evidence that all workers are guaranteed to take home earnings which are equal to or above the Pakistan minimum wage, which for 2021 was around 22,000 Pakistani rupees per month, or you can say around 109 Pakistani rupees per hour. However, considering the additional costs like unpaid waiting time, travel costs like the rising petrol prices and vehicle maintenance, we could not evidence that the other platforms have been meeting this threshold of minimum wage for the workers. There was no platform which guaranteed that workers can at least earn the local living wage after costs. And when considering the living wage, which is assessed at around 28,000 Pakistani rupees per month and around 138 Pakistani rupees per hour, none of the platforms could fulfill this criterion of fair pay. Under fair conditions, Uber is the only platform to evidence they were aware of task-specific risks and that they take action to protect workers from some of the risks that arise during jobs, like through provision of road safety training, emergency assistance, and ethical data protection measures. Okay, but none of the other platforms were able to evidence sufficient basic safety measures, nor were they, including Uber, able to provide evidence of policies or procedures to adequately protect the workers' vulnerability to income loss in case of unexpected or circumstances. Under fair contracts, a contract provided by FoodPanda, which is a public and accessible to its riders and has been made comprehensible to the majority by translating it into the national language Urdu. However, the major issue identified on most of the platforms is that contract would not be, and some platforms, they have clauses in Uber in their terms and conditions which unfairly limits or excludes liability on the part of the platform, including FoodPanda. So, under fair management, research indicated that workers often found the appeals process as inadequate, or they felt that they were being disadvantaged for voicing their concerns. Aside from this, there were insufficient evidence that platforms provide any genuine equity in their management process. For example, in removing barriers to employment of underrepresented groups, or in having effective means to stop users discriminating against workers from disadvantaged groups. And however, one positive approach was taken by Gharpar in consultation with the Fairwork Pakistan team when they implemented an anti-discrimination policy during the course of our research. Under fair representation, Gharpar was the only platform to come close to providing meaningful collective worker voice mechanisms in the form of its Gharpar monitor meetings. However, no platform formally followed even basic worker rights, such as observing the right of workers to freedom of association, or documenting a process for expression of collective worker voice, or even guaranteeing that workers will not be disadvantaged for expressing their concerns. So none of the platform were able to provide sufficient evidence to be given a score. So one of the key themes that we discussed in the report was gender. As we all know, the dismal statistics for Pakistan, one of the lowest female labor force participation rates in the world is in Pakistan. For every 100 men, only 26 women participate in the labor force, compared to a global average of 67%. We found in our research that women are concentrated mostly in domestic and personal care services, while the great majority of workers, which are men, are in ride-hailing, courier, and food delivery services. However, platforms have been looking to improve representation of women in the workforces. For instance, by 2021, Careem had registered around 1,500 women, although this was from a total of at least 700,000 registered drivers. So there was another example is of Women on Wheels program in collaboration with FoodPanda, where women were being trained how to ride in order for them to gain employment with these platforms. However, the work being created must also avoid reproducing the wider gender inequalities in Pakistan, which includes gender wage gap and the treatment of women by men, such as harassment, which is very much prevalent. Another unexpected phenomenon which occurred during our research was that there were a number of workers reporting that their monthly costs, with fuel particularly, but also maintenance costs like vehicle repair, use of internet data, and insurance costs, they were greater than their income. So in other words, they were actually paying to work for the platform. This was found in 5% of motorcycle delivery drivers, but an overwhelming 56% of ride-hailing drivers. And the key cause seems to be the imbalance between supply and demand, which increased during the pandemic. And with the fall off in demand due in part to COVID-19, and this led to particularly reducing the number of higher fare, longer journey customers. And so drivers, they could not earn the bonuses that make up a very large portion of the income. This problem actually worsened by the 30% rise in petrol prices at that time. So some workers, they remained in the job because they felt that they had no other option, and perhaps because they thought that the income cash flow and its separation from expenditure gives them the illusion that they are actually earning, although they may be locked in a vicious cycle of loss or debt from which they can't break unless the balance between income and costs improves significantly. And perhaps in partial recognition of these issues, in May of this year, Uber and Careem announced that they were going to cut the commissions of drivers to zero in Islamabad. Now I would like to invite Iftikhar Ahmad. He is the founder of Center for Research and Principal Investigator for the Fairwork Pakistan project, and he will be discussing legal context for platform economy in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Shanza, for taking us through the Fairwork Pakistan report. One of the key aims of the report and the work is to show where the platform economy stands today, but also to show where it can be in the future. So that's why we are talking about the legal context and the draft legislation that we have recommended in this report. While there's no doubt in the employment generation capacity or the potential of the platform economy, but this lack of regulation and the current free-for-all or the open approach adopted by the governments everywhere in the world is creating a labor force, a whole generation of unprotected workers. However, we believe that the basic labor protections should be available and accessible to everyone, irrespective of their contract or employment status. The legal and policy context is ambiguous and vague, as is the case in the remaining Fairwork countries. The two major problems that exist with the platform economy are the worker misclassification or the wrong classification of workers being considered independent contractors and the applicability of sector-specific regulations. When a worker is considered independent contractor, they fall under the commercial relationship with the platform rather than an employment relationship. And when a worker is considered independent contractor, it limits their access to basic and fundamental employment rights, such as the right to minimum wage, decent working hours, social security, and collective bargaining. So what is happening actually? Not only do the platforms are avoiding the obligations of employment legislation, but they also identify themselves as tech companies or technology companies, and hence enter a legal gray zone in which the applicability of sector-specific regulations becomes quite limited. We believe that for the platform economy to evolve in an inclusive way, regulation of the sector is needed. And not only regulation, the social dialogue is also needed with the key stakeholders, which include the platforms, the workers, as well as the government. Why are we suggesting a law? If you look at the labor legislation in Pakistan, you will find that we have sector-specific legislation. For example, we have factory shop establishments, the Domestic Workers Act, Home-Based Workers Act, and so on. For each sector, each upcoming sector, the state comes up with a new law. And it is also in line with the state's responsibility to enact legislation, because the Constitution requires the state to create a society based on the Islamic concept of fair play and social justice. It requires the state to remove all forms of exploitation and ensure equal protection before law. Why should government do it? Well, one of the reasons the government should do it is because we have estimated in the report that there are 500,000 workers in this country who are linked to the location-based platforms. If you look at their social contributions, it would amount to more than 13 billion rupees per year, which is much more than what is being collected by the social security institutions in the country. And if these workers are brought under the social protection net, because they are the easiest to document, the government already has very clear data on how many workers are working with these platforms, how many hours are working, and how much are they earning per day. So they are the easiest to regulate, and they can be easily brought under the labor legislation, and government at the same time broaden its tax base, as well as the social security contributions can be collected. Then those can be used to give social protection to all workers, including the platform economy workers. So what is in it for the platforms? It brings the most important aspect, which is that it correctly determines the employment status of these workers. Instead of going to the courts again and again to determine whether these are independent contractors or individual workers, the labor legislation, the draft labor legislation that we have included in this report will determine that these are all workers under the protection of labor law. Secondly, the draft legislation supports opportunities, innovation, and flexibility brought by the platform economy. And it allows for accountability. What would be the next steps? The Center for Labor Research has worked in collaboration with the Wage Indicator Foundation and the Fairwork Project to draft legislation intended to protect the rights of platform economy workers in the country. It addresses two major concerns about platform work in the country. It eliminates the chances for worker misclassification by setting various conditions and criteria, and it ensures transparency and accountability in algorithmic management. It gives platform workers all workplace rights, and it covers all fair work principles. For example, if you look at the fair pay principle, in line with the fair pay principle, the draft legislation requires the right to a minimum wage, working hour restrictions, and premium wage payments to work on public holidays, during night hours, and inclement weather like the one we are having now in the city. In line with the fair conditions principle, the draft legislation requires health and safety protections of platform workers, right to various kinds of leave and social protection, various cash benefits from the social security institutions and EOBI, including old age pensions. Similarly, it requires data protection. Under the fair contracts principle, the draft legislation requires the right to a comprehensible employment contract, which means in the language that is understood by all the workers. It requires platforms to follow the local labor legislation, like that. We have cases now where platforms say in their contracts that they don't fall under the local labor legislation. Hence, the workers cannot ask for the rights. At the same time, the draft legislation requires that there shall be no exclusion of platform liability, and they will have to take all the liabilities for their workers. Under the fair management principle, the draft legislation provides for grievance redressal mechanisms, protections from multiple forms of discrimination and harassment, including sexual harassment. In line with the fair representation principle, the draft legislation, which is already part of the report, provides for works councils requiring social dialogue at the level of platform, and most of all, the right to unionize and bargain collectively. While I've completed the part on the legal context, I will, because since we have the representatives from the government as well as from the trade union movement and from the labor expert group, I would request and suggest that if we can take forward this draft legislation, the government can consider it, as well as the trade union movement can consider it, and discuss this at the highest level of the government, and see whether we can protect the rights of the platform economy workers in this country. Thank you very much.
So finally, I would like to share about the Fairwork Pledge. So the fact that the scores are so low, this actually shows that this is the outcome of the market that is largely left for itself. And a few companies may be choosing fair outcomes for the workers, but most won't do so unless they're forced by regulation. And that said, some of you may be wondering, some of the listeners may be wondering what they can do and how they can help. So Fairwork has developed a pledge that is open to organizations. They can be businesses, charities, universities, or even religious institutions. It's a pledge for all of those organizations to do more, to pay attention to the working conditions of gig workers. And we're asking them to pay attention to the relative scores of different platforms when they or their staff or their members, they use the gig economy. So they can lead by example and demand more from these platforms. So you can find the pledge on the Fairwork website if you'd like to learn more about it. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanza, for sharing with us the findings of the report, and thank you, Iftikhar Saab, for taking us through the legal picture of the scenario. We'll be discussing it further in the webinar here, but before moving towards the panelists for the discussion on this report, I would like to emphasize on a small point here. The findings of this report help us identify the gray area, or where the problem actually lies, and take us towards the approach of problem solving, because at the end of the day, the purpose of this project is to resolve the issues that these workers are facing in this gig economy. And for expert opinions of our panelists on this report, I would like to start with Dr. Alia Hashmi Khan. Thank you, Dr. Alia, for joining us today. She has been a member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. She is also a member of Labor Expert Group under Ehsaas Social Protection Program of Government of Pakistan. She is associated in an advisory capacity as labor and gender economist with various committees of the Planning Commission of Pakistan and Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, as well as with international organizations including ILO, UNDP, and UN. Dr. Alia, coming to you, I will mention here that Pakistan has one of the lowest female labor force participating in the world, such as for every 100 only 26 women participate in the labor force, compared to a global average of 67%. And we have observed that women are somewhat working on online forms already. However, we would like to know your opinion on whether location-based platform work has the capacity to accommodate women without discrimination of any kind, since ride-hailing and delivery work are disproportionately performed by men mostly, while women are overrepresented in care work and domestic work platforms. And the effects of this occupational segregation became particularly visible during the pandemic when care, domestic, and beauty service platforms suspended their services due to national lockdown, leaving their majority women workforce out of any income opportunities. Firstly, we would like you to comment on the country report, and then we would also like you to respond to the question that, is the platform economy perpetuating occupational segregation and gender employment? And what steps can be taken by the platforms to reduce this kind of segregation? Also, considering the large gender wage gap, are these platforms creating decent work opportunities for women? And how should the government regulate this sector so that women workers' rights are actually protected without stifling the growth of digital labor platforms? Please, ma'am.
First of all, I would like to congratulate Fairwork and Fairwork Pakistan team for producing this very valuable report on the state of workers in the gig economy of Pakistan. And as we launch this report today, let me inform the audience that in Pakistan, the whole area of digital labor scholarship is very under-researched. And in fact, this is really a path-breaking report because it provides data and evidence of the conditions that gig economy workers face in Pakistan, and it also suggests legislative measures. Now, the position of women in the digital labor platforms, which are nation-based, that have been studied, obviously, we see the concentration of women in the digital labor platform Gharpar, which means at home, and it is delivering personal services, beauty services, and care services. So the first thing to understand is that it is just reflecting, or it is a microcosm of the position of women in the Pakistani labor market, where if you look at the income economy, the women are concentrated more in the care extensions of the care economy, and even sectors like agriculture, women are not recognized as workers. They are really, their work is considered as an extension of their household work. So it is a structural issue in the labor markets of Pakistan, which is again being mirrored this digital labor platform evidence. Now, to understand how women's position in the digital economy and on digital labor platforms can be enhanced and improved in of 5 fair work principles, we have to understand the technology of how these labor platforms work. And not many academicians have researched this to understand how algorithms are developed. And algorithms basically monitor, trace, track, and evaluate the workers of the digital economy. So if the women do not have the digital literacy, they are not digitally included enough to get knowledge about how their conditions of work are being determined by these algorithms, they will have no control over their conditions of work. So just before this webinar, I was talking to my friend, Mr. Zahoor Awan, who is also going to speak later on about what the trade unions in terms of their worker education programs can do. I understand that at this moment, the trade unions are not really trying to mobilize or even educate large numbers of workers in the informal economy, but perhaps this aspect of informality, which is a bridge between the formal sector and the totally informal sector, and which is there to stay, because now the digital technologies are the future of work, be it any developed country or developing country like Pakistan. We have to understand that the majority of the job opportunities are going to have a digital component. So we have to work on ways on how to improve the digital literacy, the digital inclusion, and the digital financial inclusion as well of the whole labor force that is involved, and specifically because women are lagging far behind. I was just looking while researching for this webinar, the latest GSMA mobile gender data report, and it reports that South Asia faces the largest gender digital divide globally. And what is worrisome is that because of COVID-related issues in the labor market, the digital divide has gone up in South Asia more so. So the internet enabled handset affordability and the other components that impact this divide, they have all worsened for women. So in order to address this whole issue of women in the gig economy, and especially women who want to use the digital labor platforms for decent employment, we have to understand that we have to look at the whole framework of the digital labor platforms from a gender lens. So in fact, what I'm trying to say is that we actually have to do a gender audit of the whole framework of the digital labor economy in order to find out pathways through which we can empower women and also mobilize and collectivize women on physical labor platforms to understand what their digital rights are and how to sort of struggle them, how to raise their voice for them, and how to engage better with the labor, digital labor platforms. Now, in Pakistan, the female ownership of internet-enabled phones is so low, and females usually borrow it from the head of the household to conduct their digital transactions, that they have to go through various layers of reaching their identity in this digital world economy. So I think I have raised issues that maybe will evoke responses from the audience, and hopefully we can take forward this discourse. And again, I would like to thank the Fairwork Foundation, including Pakistan, in the group of countries with Fairwork project implement huge step forward for Pakistan in terms of digital labor scholarship to go forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you much, Doctor, for your deep insights on the sensitive issue of gender disparity in the gig economy. as she mentioned that something about the algorithm, which is basically a very important point here, since it's in this digital labor platform, it's basically controlling the whole future of the workers and their rights also. And also talking about the gender, according to her, she suggests that gender audit of the whole digital labor sector should be done. And the women should be made more aware of their rights so they can actually engage and fight for them better. Thank you, ma'am. For our next speaker, we have Mutahar Khan with us. Mutahar Khan has been mapping the Pakistani startup ecosystem for over 3 years through his weekly column for Dawn. He currently works as a business development manager and contributing editor for Medis Global and regularly writes for Dawn. He graduated from Bocconi University, Italy, and majored in economics before moving back to Pakistan to pursue a career in business journalism. Thank you, Mutahar, for joining us here today. First of all, I would like you to comment on our country report and also considering your work on the startup ecosystem in the country. Please give us a general overview of the platform economy in the country. And for this, we would like you to focus on the location-based platform work. Also, what is your opinion about the issues and hurdles these platform workers are facing, especially the issue of the negative income, since some of the workers reported their costs exceeding income, including 5% of the motorcycle delivery workers, 56% of ride-hailing drivers, as in the report. What could be the reason behind the phenomenon of negative incomes, and what steps can be taken by the platforms to ensure decent working opportunities for workers, and how do you see the government should regulate the sector so that the platform worker rights are actually protected without hindering the growth of the digital labor platforms? Please.
Thank you so much for having me. So just a quick comment. So, I mean, first of all, this is a great piece of work that sort of creates a benchmark to understand where Pakistan. Okay, so yeah, this is a very good step to understand what's happening in the gig economy, because it's a fast-growing space. We're looking at the number you guys gave is 500K, which is around. I mean, Careem alone used to have 82,000 plus active captains in pre-COVID. Obviously, the situation might have changed a bit here and there, but more or less, it's a pretty big ecosystem, and you're looking at not just Careem, Bykea, but a number of players in the delivery space that have come into the market and are trying to attract new gig workers. Again, obviously the model is this again, the same independent contractor thing. So this report does help create the awareness needed to understand what those issues are, what the problem is actually with this model, and I think, yeah, that's on the other hand, like if you're looking at, so I mentioned that these platforms have been growing in importance every year. It started with Bykea primarily in 2016 and Careem around the same time, and we more or less we're looking at a higher number of people that are actually working in the for location-based platforms. If you're going with that 500K numbers, then we have the total workforce in IT sector as per the labor force survey. The labor force survey puts that number at around 340-ish K. So even assuming growth, we're looking at around 500K. So we have more gig workers than we have tech workers. So this is, again, broadly, we can just put them in broader technology, or at least both are a function of the overall technology ecosystem. Yet one side does receive a lot of attention, be it the income tax incentives or whatever, and the other side that is actually fueling that entire growth is ignored. So we're looking at the issues. If you're looking at negative income, you guys mentioned, right? I think, and it was 56% that was for car hailing. The problem there is that actually it's beyond this control of platforms as well. Because if you're looking at Careem, for example, they entered the market in 2016 when policy rate was at 5.75%. Car prices were pretty low. Exchange rate was at around 100. So everything, the macro dynamics were very much in favor of of a company like Careem. They could survive. Obviously, it was supported by VC money, which is again a very big factor that we cannot ignore, because someone raised a question about the role of market. The role of market is that market is providing excess cash. That is the primary role of market right now. It's not providing it anymore, but when it does, whenever a new platform is launched, they have excess liquidity thanks to VC money. And what that liquidity does is that it allows companies to attract workers. They attract workers by giving incentives that they cannot sustain. So in the short run, now it might work if you're looking at, let's say, it might be, and it hasn't really worked honestly elsewhere as well, but in the context of Pakistan, if you're looking at, let's understand the economics of it. You're looking at, I'm, let's say, working for 50,000 rupees, and Careem comes in and offers me 1 lakh rupees a month. The car is costing me, let's say, 9 lakh. I'm talking about 2016. So the car cost me million, say. In a year, I can cover that cost of asset by making, because Careem is offering incentives, I can cover that cost of asset by making 100K a month. Now, when the economics of that changes, because the macroeconomy changes, the car is selling not for 1 million, car is now selling for 2.5 million. So the cost of funding has gone up drastically as well. So I cannot recover the cost of asset. Now, what that means is that company cannot really sustain, especially when company cannot sustain those incentive structures in an economy like Pakistan, especially. Elsewhere as well, this is a problem, but in Pakistan, this is a much bigger concern than anywhere else because of our cyclical nature. That raises the cost, that raises your fuel prices, and that has been happening with Careem. Again, you're looking at one point you were looking at fuel price of 90, 100, and now you're looking at 230, 240, and obviously the cost of car has gone up by 80, 90% more or less, even more. Up to 150% in certain cases. So obviously the cost of maintenance has gone up as well proportionately. So it will have an impact on negative income, and unfortunately that is not something that companies can control as such. It's beyond Careem, it's beyond anyone else, honestly. This is where government of Pakistan comes in. How they can, and it's better economic management, not by regulating these platforms. This part cannot be regulated. The part that can be regulated is obviously the social security aspect of it, which you guys have mentioned in the draft legislation as well, which is even better in my view, because that creates a framework around which this policy should be structured. Because there's been a lot of criticism, or maybe not a lot, but a fair bit of criticism of these gig economy platforms, but this puts a solution in how we should approach the issue. Just one thing that I think should be considered is that a lot of regulation, or the idea of regulation, is around treating gig workers as full-time workers, which should obviously be the aspiration. But I think there should be a certain qualification. For example, certain number of hours per week, and we should build on that. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of Latin American countries have this model, not for gig workers, but generally for any worker that is not full-time. We don't have an hourly wage worker rate. So a lot of suggestions have come from a monthly perspective, I think, and what that risks is that companies will always be countering that, any legislation that gives it as a sort of employment. And obviously, there should be that should again be the aspiration, as I mentioned, but at least the structure of the legal framework should be that it tackles the hourly rate first, and then move on to the second part. And I think you guys have already covered main aspects on what should be the right to unionize, the right to fair representation in the council. That I think that's a very good benchmark to work with. Whether that will be taken up or not, obviously that's another issue. And one thing that that has come up a couple of times is the issue of algorithmic pricing, and I think this is a major problem. A lot of companies ride hailing generally has it easier, it's very simple, but when it comes to delivery, the issue is very complex. For example, you cannot, no one in this room, no one in this panel can understand how FoodPanda gives what rate FoodPanda gives. It depends on the hour of the day, it depends on what route you're taking, it depends on the number of orders at that particular point. So there is no way the rider can understand that as well. So it should be a very simple, which you guys have already mentioned. Say, so it should be based on that. Should be one key aspect of the regulation. Yeah.
Thank you, Mutahir. As he's mentioned, he's explained the phenomena behind negative income and how it's beyond the platform's control, since due to the economical shifts, the cost of the funding increases, cost of the maintenance increases, and seems like the workers are spending more than actually they are earning. But this is beyond the control and seems to be not able to be regulated properly. But the sector that can be regulated is social security. That can be done through the proper legislation laws. Thank you, Mutahir. Thank you so much. Coming to our next speaker on the panel, we have Yasin Aslam with us. Thank you, Yasin. Yasin is president and co-founder of ADCU, App Drivers and Couriers Union, who launched an ambitious legal campaign against Uber for workers' rights in 2015 and has been organizing drivers for the past 8 years. In February 2021, the ADCU won their case in the UK Supreme Court to prove that Uber drivers were not simply self-employed, but were workers entitled to basic rights like minimum wage and holiday pay. So yes, Yasin, what are your comments on our country report, firstly? And also, being the lead claimant in Aslam versus Uber case, you're aware of the unfair practices employed by the platforms. Could you explain the massive imbalance of the powers between digital platforms and digital labor platforms and the workers? And while keeping the issue of misclassification of workers in mind, how the tech is using legal gray zone to deprive these workers of their basic workplace rights. Also, owing to 2021 Supreme Court decision, what are the potential consequences of this ruling for Uber drivers and workers in the global gig economy? Yes, please.
Yeah, hi there. Firstly, thank you for having me today. And also, I would just want to say special thank you to Iftikhar, Ahmad, who I've been talking to and worked with over the past few years. Yeah, firstly, thank you for the report. So I just want to give the background. So I was one of the Uber drivers that took Uber to court here in the UK in 2015. Now, it's very important to understand that in the UK, we do have laws. So we have 3 employment status. So you have like self-employed independent contractors. Then right at the bottom, we have employees. Then in the middle, we have a middle status, which they call Limb B workers. So what we won in the court was the right as workers. And what that means is you're entitled to basic minimum wage, holiday pay, and pension. That's all it is. So you don't get maternity, paternity, sick pay. So it's just basic rights. And Uber fought us for many years, all the way up to Supreme Court, which we won. Now, I would go and say that, look, we do need regulations here. We do need stronger laws here, because when you look at these, it's a bit unfair when I say about Gharpar or these smaller apps, but I'm talking about these global apps such as Careem, Uber. I mean, these models heavily rely on misclassification. It's about wage theft. It's about exploitation. So especially when you look in the UK and in other parts of the world, the model relies on, vulnerable, desperate people that are in desperate positions. So Uber comes in, they create this kind of opportunity for them. And they say and they would turn around, and this is where the gray area comes in, misclassification. They'll say, look, we're creating these opportunities where you are your boss, and you're carrying all the liabilities, you're carrying all the risk, costs, overhead, everything. You don't get no statutory rights, and it's the company that makes the money. But when you go back into the main issue, the issue is it has to be regulated, and we need to end the misclassification. Yeah. So in my case, and just to give you a background, it doesn't matter whether you're in Pakistan, India, Australia, or USA. It's the same model. So it's just to give you a background, when I started working for Uber here in London in 2013, I was one of the first drivers to actually start working on Uber on the day they launched. And just to give you an idea, so let's say I pick up a customer and the job or the fare was £10. Uber would charge me 20% commission. Therefore, I would get paid £8. But I didn't get paid £8. I used to get paid an extra £10. Therefore, I would be getting £18. So a customer paid Uber £10. After Uber would deduct a commission of £2, but I'm still getting more than what customer paid me. And that's how they started off in all these countries. So if you go into Pakistan, and I've been speaking to many drivers there in Pakistan, you know, like Uber spent a lot of money. They heavily invested in create this fake economy to, you know, bring in these workers in order to, you know, like get the platform busy. So for example, like I know I've spoken to many drivers in Pakistan that went out there, brought brand new cars thinking they're going to make money. People sold their house, their land just to buy a car or take out finance. And then what we see is the other side of Uber, where they start, you know, mass recruiting, reducing the fares. So you start seeing a different side where the work starts drying out, meaning you have to work longer and longer hours. And it's not easy for people. And it's the same in the UK. You can't just suddenly walk away when you're not making money because you now invested into it. And especially like in places like Pakistan, where you don't get any government support, where here in the UK, we do have some like housing benefit, universal credit. So there is some support for the workers here. So, you know, like it's very important to look at the balance. Now, in the UK, we have the same problem where Uber was not paying VAT, and recently they have started to pay. And it's the same where when you look at the developing countries, especially in Pakistan, it's very important. We can't have, you know, companies like Uber come into the country, make billions, take it back into, you know, whether it's in Holland or USA. That is money being stolen from the economy there that would help people there. So, you know, so it's important to have these laws. And like I disagree with the last speaker, because we do need to be working at you know, having better protection and regulation. Now, one of the things that wasn't touched on is how do you enforce these laws? So even like in our case, Uber did everything because they were able to afford to drag the process, and they have, you know, unlimited money, resources to fight this, and workers don't stand a chance. So the question is, let's say these proposed laws were enforced, how do we make sure that companies like Uber do obey these laws, and what are the punishments if they don't? So, you know, if you look at Europe, like there are proposed EU laws, and they're perfect laws. You know, we want these laws to come into effect because we don't want workers to fight these lengthy, expensive battle in court. So, you know, those laws make it easy. But the question is, if they're not being enforced, like, for example, here in the UK, we have one at the Supreme Court, and the court clarified our working time. And the working time is from log on. So the minute we log on to the Uber app to the minute we log off, we are workers, where Uber interprets that as the working time is from the time we are engaged, meaning we get a job, to the time we complete that job. And it's the same, like if you look in California, like we had the AB5, you know, so we get all these other like Uber, like the point is they're going to fight. And like whether it's universities, whether it's trade unions, whether it's workers, it's all about coming together and making sure that we do have better regulation, protection, because don't forget, these are people right at the bottom. They're open to exploitation. How do we end these exploitation? How do we end this abuse? So there's a massive imbalance between the two, you know, between the platform, because on one side, you got a company, I know you say, you know, like their cost of operating is next to nothing. It is next to nothing. So for Uber to go and launch in Pakistan and then go and launch in India, the cost is nothing. But who is carrying that liability? It's the worker. The worker goes out, they buy the car, you know, they got to carry all the wears and the tears and whatever it is. So they're carrying all that cost, and they should be given statutory rights. And what's happening in Pakistan, where they don't have any you know, regulation for the platform workers in terms of employment, is important we have them, because these workers should be given the statutory rights, like for example, the right to minimum wage. They should. And another thing that needs to be added into the draft is pension. So what happens if someone like a worker is working for Uber for 10 years, they're being denied pension? Now, you know, like, you know, like there's a lot of issue that we need to work about, but, you know, like really, it comes down to, you know, like when we talk about the UK here. So, you know, when we talk about the fair contract or fair representation, Yeah, so when we talk about contract, one of the arguments here in the UK about contract was, and this is why we went to court in the first place, is Uber said, we work for Uber in Holland, even though I was based in London, all my dealing was in London. We have the same argument in South Africa, where drivers are being denied their rights because on the contract it says Uber is saying that these guys work in Uber in Holland, not in Uber. So it's the same thing. I mean, I haven't looked at the contract for some of the workers in Pakistan, but like, and especially in Pakistan, when we're talking about the workers, a lot of them speak a different language, in Urdu. So all these contracts, they will probably be in English. So, like, the question is, how fair are these contracts? Does the average worker understand it? So if you look at the case Aslam versus Uber, the whole issue was around the contract. Like, an average worker does not understand what a contract is, or what, like, and the court was willing to look at the real working relationship, is what was really happening behind closed doors. And so, like, and secondly, when we talk about trade union, the right for workers or freedom of association, again, like, what we're now seeing, that workers are winning. We're seeing workers everywhere in different parts of the world organizing. We're seeing loads of protests. We're seeing strikes. So what we're now seeing is a different type of Uber, where they're actually setting up their own trade unions or trying to buy out trade unions. And we see this in New York, where they have IDG, Independent Drivers Guild, like the same around EU. And even in the UK, they've done a deal with GMB. Now, GMB only represent less than 1% of the Uber drivers, where ADC, on the other hand, represent 10%. Minimum of 10% of the Uber drivers in the UK. So it should be the workers that should have a say on what union that Uber should be, or union that should be negotiating, not the employer choosing which trade union it should be. So like, for example, like like in the UK again, when we talk about, like, Uber had to provide a pension because based on the Equality Act and also the Pension Act. But this pension that they introduced discriminated against the Muslim drivers, because 80% of the drivers in the UK are Muslim. Now, when you talk about their faith, they can't invest or be involved in certain things such as pork, alcohol, gambling. So it has to be a halal pension, which is available widely in the UK. But it's the employer's job to therefore make sure that they have, like, they provide a workplace pension, which, complies with the workers or meets the need of the workers. So, even though Uber's claiming they're working with GMB, it shows that it's a sham setup, because it was done, the pension they went and chose was, was the one that benefit the shareholders and not the workforce. So we as ADCU filed some legal action. Uber is now trying to change it. And then most recently, again, Uber announced a new fare increase here in the UK, but it's not, it wasn't, it just like, it wasn't like, there's no real negotiating happening. It's just a sham sort of setup. And this is why one of the things that really needs to be highlighted, especially for a Fairwork project, when they talk about fair contract or fair representation, it should be the worker choosing the union, not the employer. So if it's the employer that's recognizing the union, it's undermining the workers. So the power should always be the workers. And the question we need to be asking together is, how do we work with these workers? How do we make sure that it's the workers that are empowered? And in Pakistan, we've seen so many protests happening in Lahore, in Karachi, even in Islamabad by Uber drivers. So there is momentum there. There is energy there. But unfortunately, what Pakistan is lacking is the fact that none of the trade unions have actually come forward to try and organize these workers, because they don't want to do it. And but what we don't want to do is encourage a company like Uber to go out and set this up in a sense, like, this is a union, so just to shut off workers. But something, and that's something that we all need to work together to make sure that workers do have this voice. But yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, I think this the draft law, I did read it. I think it's very important that this is a good starting point for the workers there, because it means once you got some kind of regulation, it makes things easy for the workers to start from. And without any regulation, it means it just gets harder and harder. And an average worker just does not understand what the laws are. They need someone like CLR come forward and help craft these laws out, which protects the workers. And that's the whole idea. It's about trying to regulate, making sure that everything, like, workers ain't being exploited and it's fair across the board. but I think I just went over my time. But I have too much to say and too little time. But yeah, happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As Yasin mentioned about how the consequences after the consequences late.
Could I just, sorry, just before, one thing very important that I talk about is gender discrimination. I didn't touch on that. And we have the same issue here in the UK. Yeah. Now, when we talk about gender discrimination, and even like I said, we have the worker status here in the UK, but you don't get, like, it's for a female or a woman, she doesn't get any maternity or paternity. So if a woman wants to start up a family, it's straight away, no, you cannot work for Uber, because if you were to start up a family, you don't get any statutory rights. So the platforms are made, and this is maybe further on in the future when we're going to be debating that, you know, it's the same issue here, where if you look at the Uber drivers or the licensed private hire drivers, there's very small minority numbers of females working in the industry. But one of the reasons why that's stopping that is because the laws. So if these females were entitled to paternity, maternity rights, that would encourage more people to come into this because they have the same kind of protection. So it's not just in Pakistan, we have this issue here in the UK. But anyway, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He's mentioned about how in UK there is discrimination and distinguished between self-employed people, workers, and employed. So these Uber workers are coming in the category of the worker. And after the case and scenario, they have actually, Uber has started paying better than before. Also, workers are getting more access to the union association formation, which is, however, the issue about the gender is still under point to be considered in UK as well, since it needs to be worked on there as well. So thank you so much. Well, further in our panel, we have Mr. Zahur Awan with us, who he's General Secretary of Pakistan Workers Federation. So with your remarkable experience of 42 years with trade unions, other than overall comment on the country report, we would like you to respond on the issues there. We'd like to hear your views about the state of labor rights in the country, especially the informal economy and platform work, and how are the trade unions trying to attract platform workers to the labor movement. Furthermore, recently in March 2022, a 3-day strike was observed by the FoodPanda workers, demanding fair wages and better working conditions. What's your opinion on that? And does Pakistan Workers Federation, being the largest federation in the country, support such strikes? And how should the government regulate this sector so that platform workers' rights are actually protected? Please, sir.
Let me in the outset, first of all, thank you particularly the Fair Work as well as Center for Labor Research, Brother Iftikhar and others, and their initiative also to having a very important report in which I think a lot of things what we need in the trade union movement has been a lot recovered to this sector, which is the sector of the platform economy, which we can say it otherwise informal worker also. But within the informal worker spectrum, which is on platform economy, digital economy, and more particularly of the workers' rights issues. Importantly, what I think I have as reported just 7 minutes. So anyhow, I think the importantly, this report also it covers, and moreover in the informal sector, already trade unions, those they are working, and moreover particularly previously Dr. Alia Saiba, she is there, she led also in the workers labor expert group about that how informal sector, those they are being covered in the social protection. But more particularly sense of the time frame given to me of 7 minutes, I would like to refer to 2 things in which I think I can give the material. One is very importantly, recently my book, which has come on the centenary declaration and the future of work also, in which there are particularly one important chapter which relates with automation, digitalization, and the platform economy, how workers' point of view has been reflected, and it is also an awareness also. Though the people, those that don't know still about this sector. So there is a lot of, and moreover, one of the ILO official, very important official who read this book in Pakistan office, he also reported that this is a lot of information in that chapter. But that chapter, beside my own effort, there is effort also from some senior trade union leader on this important, because that chapter is for the 7 future challenges for the world of work. This includes also one of them. So therefore, I think I would very much like although Brother Iftikhar, as I can give some extra copy. So this work, this chapter should may kindly be sent to all of them, and moreover, wherever you like, would give an input, because I don't want to repeat many things there, because it is already quite very comprehensive chapter of my that book. Second is this, that since ILO has come with the 100-year centenary declaration, definitely they have also covered this on the future of work. How would this informal sector and sector like this, how those they are. And we, at the end of the book, this is a way forward also in my that book, a chapter which relates with that of that how worker suggestion are those, they are on those matters relating with this informal as well as digitalization and other. Although there is centenary declaration, it has its contents, but in the end chapter it is given. So this is my request to get benefit where already I have some working through this book to your work, which is already very good in terms of where such a comprehensive paper on this and research study has been done. Secondly, what my feeling is that when we say about, first of all, and first and foremost, is about the fair management, how the fair management, how those they can be made as fair management for this future of this work, which is relates with this. And moreover, when we say much of the work, most particularly in developed world, which Brother Yasin, I think, has mentioned already, a lot of formal worker has been put here into this informal work. And moreover, now there is another issue coming because of COVID-19. Telework has been a lot, and lot of workers, those they are getting it that, okay, you do your telework from your home, we don't need your services anymore, but they are getting very much less wages, less living and working condition, less a lot of other emoluments which they were getting. So these are other telework which is also coming as one of the challenge also. So here there are a lot of now concentration it is given by international trade union movement and developed world, US, Britain, and many other European. This work is suffering a lot to that of the formal work, where they have been put formal workers into informal economy like this. Now, another thing, when we say it about decent work, fair pay, fair working and living condition, fair contracts, and gender, issues also related with it. Here, I also want to say that it is, and moreover, one important thing in the research study is that what is the way forward? Legislation is very important. First, legislation came, and like the legislation, it has come for the domestic worker. In some provinces, it is coming more, and home-based worker. So these workers can be more put in proper way where there is some lot of concern, a lot of things, those they can be registered. Because informal workers, a lot of informal workers, they don't have any access, any registration. One of the court even just observed our National Industrial Relations Commission, where they said employing any worker less than 20 is master servant rule. In their decision, they have written. Malik Saab knows this. There is it is seen. So here, how we say that master servant rule, those they exist, even if workers, those they are employed less than 20, where standing order is not applicable. So master servant rule. So here also sometime when we say the fair management master servant rule, it exists. Very tell that they can have like social security is applicable of them on them. EOBI brother Raja Faiz is sitting here can make more elaboration on that is, and social protection other laws also. Those they are applicable. So how to build the gate? How to make it, because it is 500,000, and how much they are earning. Brother Iftikhar has given this 5 billion a year. These companies, those they are earning more than, and moreover now it is if 500,000 workers, but with the pace of time, it would come even maybe 1 million within next 1.5 years or minimum, maximum 2 years. We will get this type of workers even more. So therefore, to nip the evil in the bud, it is very necessary, and we should go ahead for that legislation, how it should come. And there is a draft legislation here. Brother Iftikhar has already put it, which I will be very much for fair work and this initiate, appreciate this initiative. Legislation, they had given at least a draft. Are there, although room for improvement is everywhere, here also, we would also like to say, Brother Raja Faiz Saab is very quite expert on things which relates with the legislation. I think we need his help very properly in terms of this legislation, because already, although Labor Research Center, they have put it like that instead of freedom of association, there should be something. And Works Council is one of them, and concentrated on the Works Council. No doubt about it. But that is not alternative to trade union, because workers we have to make Industrial Relation Act so proper that it coincide with this. Then okay, Works Council, which suggested by Iftikhar, Brother Iftikhar, the research paper, it is quite good. Mean that we need something is better than having nothing. Something is there. But then on the other hand, Works Council, they don't have any right under the legislation to give charter of demand. They don't have any right to negotiate. They don't have any right to properly adjudicate or to give finally a right to make a strike. It is not covered under this. So how to make it related with it, even Works Council is okay. So how they can be made more stronger, although moreover already law covers that are established in the Industrial Relation Acts, but union is there, so they can nominate the worker representative. The worker representative then would come the sole responsibility of the management, and they will do it according to their own wish and desire. The worker will not be having a say. And seeker, in order to determination of proper forum in the Works Council, that is then something very, very difficult for to build the arts in the. So it is not that easy arts to write in our trade union spectrum. But anyhow, then on the other hand, we have certainly very, very good example on self-employed. SEWA, Self-Employed Women Association in India, is one doing very good work. They have a lot of good achievement, and moreover, I inquired from them that in the SEWA, Self-Employed Women Association in India, how you make collective bargaining? You are self-employed. It is very difficult. How you bargain? But they said that, okay, we have a lot of women workers in different places. And we make them, we unionize them. And at the end, we told them that, okay, you don't go below this rate of any of the employment. Like, for instance, this is F6 sector, a lot of domestic women workers on the part-time, on the full-time, they are working. So if they make association here in Islamabad, so if they make it this way, that, okay, don't minimize the other. So make it your a proper wage structure and don't offer your services less than that. So definitely employer need it. Definitely employer need it, and they will never go down, and they will hire, and then all of you will come in the same spectrum of getting a proper, at least a fair or at least some wage. So by some remuneration. So SEWA is successful. So it launched, it did it, and this is the way which indirect collective bargaining did it. So this is, I think, more important. Now I come, in fact, very much less time I think I do have available. More importantly, as Sister Alia, she mentioned, education, yes, and it needs a lot of awareness. Even syllabus and education material within the trade union movement, as well as with the other institute. I don't know whether Directorate of Worker Education is that much active now after 18th Amendment, but we have NILAT, National Institute of Labor Administration Training. So we need also those instructors to come, because much of them doesn't know still about how this platform automation, what is its challenges, what is the future of work, how much they are, what are those examples. So awareness raising is very, very important in this sector. And my last point is about more particularly about this legislation as as well as we see it that how in the social protection it should come, because to me even social security, as I mentioned, is applicable even on a single worker, and administratively they have done it on 5. So I thank you very much. I hope, fervently hope, this our efforts for this type of workers and this initiative would be crowned in success in time to come with all of our close collaboration with each other. Last point was this about your strike matter. You know, like what it happens. Any industrial action is as a last resort. We usually, I remained as a lot of time in that within trade union movement, we did labor dispute settlements. I never supported strike. I usually try to convince our trade union to negotiate on table, fight with them and come with a conclusion. So far during my time, only 4 strikes were held. One was in Ghazi Barotha, one other. So this is very small number. We usually don't encourage, but when you don't have any way, then you ultimately come. Although law of us is very quite clear, where you negotiate, you give then failure certificate on conciliation. Then at the last resort, it comes through law. But these workers, when there is no law, when they are fed up, they come, and then there is a strike. And strike is usually successful in terms of their, get together, because there is a lot of exploitation. But then how to handle it? Whether the employer would replace it by other workers, then strike is finished, it is failed. Or if they don't get it, then they come. And this has happened in lot of cases. This has happened in, वो हमारे मुल्क में कहते हैं ना, मैं कहता हूं कि वो 22 लाख क्लर्क हड़ताल पे चलेगी, और यार 22 लाख बहुत बड़ी तादाद है। वजह ये है कि पार्लियामेंट के हाउस के आगे तुम ही आकर वो कर दो तो कुछ और बन जाता है। वो क्या वजह है? मैं हमेशा गवर्नमेंट की मीटिंगों में यही कहता हूँ, गिव देम दिस राइट। एकदम वाइल्ड कैट स्ट्राइक अगर हो जाती है, दैट इज नॉट गुड। पीछे डंडे खाए हमने भी पार्लियामेंट हाउस के आगे, याद होगा जी, वो क्लेरिकल स्टाफ आपका, वो उसको राइट नहीं है, दे डोंट हैव एनी राइट। सिस्टर आतफा मलिक साहब knows it. I think she said this in one of the meeting inside the ministry, that look, but some of the वो राहदारियां हैं ना जो जिधर वो बिल का इंतजार कर रहे होते हैं, the people those they are sitting don't have even a fan. In many of the places they don't have a fan. So if they have some association of the secretariat implies properly, so that they can demand at least this minimum working, workplace right, very, very workplace right minimum. So therefore, I think that strike, I heard it. It was successful at the end. The question you raised,
Yes, there was yes. It was successful to this extent that platform that these workers belong to, they talk to them. We don't have the complete details how many, whether it was actually successful in the sense that whether the actual human demands of the platform workers were really heard by the platform. But yes, it was reported in the news that it was successful.
Oh, very good. In fact, like I give you one example, just maybe just for your information. Newspaper hawkers, they are also informal workers. Brother Iftikhar has been to their office just to meet me, and we saw it informal worker. I told them how you make the strike. So what they did it, that for the newspaper, they have not general strike for all the newspaper. Although journalists don't get that much right, but they get it because in 20 rupees of the newspaper, they get it 8 rupees. So a lot mean that in their terms, there how they get it. But then on the other hand, what they do, they usually do it this that in the morning, because after 12 o'clock in the midnight, they gather for newspaper collection and then morning distribution. So at that time, the newspaper hawkers, our union leaders, they go to them and tell them, okay, today, you don't, because it was their something not better with Noai Wakat or Jang. Okay, please don't throw Jang today. Please don't throw Khabarein today. Then the next day, 40,000 newspaper, those they come, and then they make a telephone call whose advertisement were in the newspaper. That newspaper is not distributed, claim that pay. And then in the meantime, in Rawalpindi next day, by second Lahore, third day. So by this way, they were successful. That newspaper owner who are third top, power people, they were surrendered in front of them. So these are the way in which they do it. So if such strike is happened, if they are properly guided, it is good. So that recognition, they will get it, that they are also workers. They do have their right. But I think the best thing is to bring it inside the bill legislation in which they have. I think this bill, if it is successfully done for Islamabad, replicated in the other provinces, inside I have just seen it, I think it would help a lot to this, which was your last question. Thank you very much. I am very sorry if I am beyond my 7 minutes.
Thank you, sir. This was Zahoor Awan with us. He's a worker, member of ILO governing body and General Secretary of Pakistan Workers Federation. He's made a suggestion about the legislation, for which I will request Iftikhar Saab to respond to that.
So, sir, thank you very much for taking the time and going through the report and talking about the trade union rights. So, in the draft legislation, yes, we did focus on works councils, but Section 8 of the draft legislation talks about that the platform workers shall have the right to form and join organizations or unions of their own choosing and right to collective bargaining as provided under the Industrial Relations Act 2012. These are the transferential because the platforms are working in more than one province. So the 2012 legislation shall be applicable to them. And we didn't want to repeat the whole law in this law. So we have referred to that law. And I'm sure the platform workers, once we have this law, the platform workers shall also have their unions. But yes, we wanted to mention specifically the works councils, because that has to be a start. There has to be a start. Yes, even when the workers today want to form unions, they don't have the legal right to form a union, and there's no legal right to collective bargaining in this country at this moment, at least. So yes, we did want to start with the works councils, but Section 8 of the legislation, draft legislation, does provide for the applicability of the trade union law to the platform workers once we have this new law taken up by the government. Thank you very much.
For our next speaker, we have Syed Muhammad Ali. He's development anthropologist by training. He teaches graduate courses at American Georgetown and Johns Hopkins University, and he is non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Dr. Ali is the author of book Development, Poverty, and Power in Pakistan. He's also been writing weekly op-eds for the Express Tribune in Pakistan for the past decade. Considering the time difference between Islamabad and Washington, D.C., we requested him to record a video about his views. Well, coming to the point, the NHDR estimated a 16% increase in the employment within the formal sector, compared to 7% in the informal sector, which is encouraging, given that the workers in the formal sector generally have more protection and better pay than those in the informal sector. But despite that, marginalized people, including the poor, especially women, migrants, and ethnic and religious minorities, are facing exploitation in the labor market. Considering Muhammad Ali Saab's vast experience in field of anthropology, we requested him to share his views regarding the historical perspective on casualization of labor and its recent manifestation in the form of at-home work in Pakistan, and how should the government act to counter this onslaught of informalization and casualization of employment in the country, especially in the platform economy. I'll request the hosting team to play the video now.
Being a development anthropologist by training, I would today like to give a brief historical perspective on the casualization of labor and its recent manifestation in the form of platform work in a country like Pakistan. Now, platform digital labor is perhaps the latest form of casualization of labor, which has been created within the context of a gig economy. The gig economy itself has led to this profusion of casual and contract-based jobs instead of full-time and permanent positions. While the gig economy enables businesses to become more nimble and to minimize overheads and maximize profits, it has also led to the further disempowerment of the labor force. While the extraction of raw materials to fuel production processes has a long history, the process of colonization perfected the art of labor and raw material extraction from the global south to boost industrialization in the West. Now, long gone are also the days when manufacturing used to take place closer to home. Recall how in the early part of the 20th century, Henry Ford had introduced the idea of an assembly line within the factories in the effort to increase efficiency. While this innovation boosted manufacturing productivity across the board, such segmentation of the production process into much smaller mundane tasks made individual workers much more easily replaceable. However, Henry Ford at least wanted to pay his workers well enough so that they could become the consumers of the mass-produced vehicles being made in his factories. Yet the quest of efficiency did not end there. Entrepreneurs soon realized that they could make more money by shifting their production processes overseas, where regulation was lax and where labor was much cheaper to hire. So offshoring then enabled these manufacturing processes to move further away from their home countries, where they were not even subjected to, to the environmental or the labor laws of their home countries. And then further on, outsourcing was the next stage in this evolution of the globalized production system, which in turn enabled supply chains to become even more convoluted and complex. It is now common for multinational corporations to source raw materials and produce an array of agricultural, textile, and other forms of products in far-flung countries, which offer them the best deal due to those countries' own desperation to attract foreign direct investment. Factories in poorer countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan also further outsource a range of pre-production processes outside the factory gate. And they use then contractual forms of labor arrangements within the factory to compete, and maximize their own profits. The global supply chain has thus become very sophisticated and efficient, but it remains rife with labor violations. There have been repeated exposés of pet food or seafood being sold in store chains across the US and in Europe, being sourced via supply chains that are tainted by exploitation and even forced labor. Child labor has been reported within the sports goods industry, and even electronics manufacturing has had a range of labor rights abuses. However, given the number of intermediaries involved in global supply chains, it's easy for multinationals to distance themselves from blame when labor abuses are reported, or when workplace disasters like the Rana factory fires in Bangladesh do occur. Multinationals can feign sort of ignorance to protect their brand image and point a finger at lax implementation of labor inspections in poor countries or the negligence of local factory owners. While there's been some talk of holding multinationals accountable, multinational corporations accountable for labor abuses within their supply chains, in the entirety of their supply chains, multinationals are still much more focused on ensuring the quality of products being sold under their brand name. And they have many sophisticated monitoring mechanisms to ensure that quality. But they are less concerned with trying to pay heed to what sorts of environmental or labor conditions are in place within their production lines. Now, digital work platforms are poised to transform labor markets around the world, including in the global south, which may lead to another race to the bottom of the digital barrel, as it were. And, this will have significant consequences in terms of wages, job security, and other work conditions specific to digital platforms, because they are further complicating what it means to work, and who one is actually working for.
Thank you for sharing the video. You can also hear this as he has elaborated this historical perspective of how labor shifted towards more casual practices and how this has created more room for the employers to exploit the workers due to non-applicability of any check and balance system, also because such economical activities are not properly regulated through any law or unbiased one, which again brings us to the legislation, which we've already talked a lot about. So moving forward, today we are accompanied by Azhar Malik Sahab. He's joined us. He's Deputy Secretary for Ministry of Overseas Pakistani and Human Resource Development. He's accompanied by two section officers, Mr. Asim and Mr. Junaid. We welcome you here. I would request Azhar Sahab to talk about a few things. Since the ministry aims at working to strategize national policy, planning and coordination regarding manpower development and employment promotion for intending overseas workers, what role the ministry can play for location-based gig workers, especially while dealing with international organizations in the area of gig economy and social security? Is the ministry already working on similar initiatives in line with the ILO recommendation 204 on the transition from informal to formal economy in Pakistan, especially when more than 70% of the non-agricultural employment is in the informal sector?
Thank you for inviting the Ministry of Overseas for the launch of this report by CLR on labor standards and for platform economy. As long as fair work is concerned, Mr. Iftikhar has well elaborated, and other participants also gave their thoughts on different things. The fair work, as per the report, this report is concerned, includes, I think, 5 to 6 main different aspects under the fair work. So the new proposed law also covered all of these aspects. That is fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representations. Where fair conditions includes health, leave, maternity, etc., and fair management includes grievance redressal, etc., and fair representation. These are the right to unionize and to collective bargain. Likewise, there are different scorings on the base of which this report is mainly related to. These are scoring from 0 to 10, and for different interviews which were made, and on different other interventions, I think none of the segment got scores from more than 1 in that things. And the legal context of the regulations of this platform economy, that is ambiguous, and policy context also needs some intervention. As long as the role of our ministry is concerned, for which I have been, I think, supposed to be here, I would assure the maximum input on part of our ministry. As long as the CLR is concerned, their work is astonishing and marvelous. I would say that it's an enormous effort for the legislation of workers that are in gig economy and the platform workers. So on behalf of Ministry of Overseas and Labor Human Resource Development, I assure full cooperation.
Thank you, sir. Special thanks for ensuring about the role of ministry in this sector, especially. Moving forward, further discussion, we are accompanied here by Raja Fazal Hassan Saab. He is labor law expert. Formerly, he worked with Employees Old Age Benefits Institution. He served as Central Labor Advisor in the Ministry of Labor and Manpower for more than a decade. He drafted the Labor Policy 2010 and has been involved in drafting of labor legislation for decades. Raja Saab, first we would like to know your overall comment on the country report. Further, we are also interested in knowing your views on regulating the platform economy in Pakistan and why separate legislation is needed for location-based platform workers. Also, we would like to hear your views on our draft legislation for platform workers, and if you have any suggestions regarding the draft also. Please.
Thank you very much. So far as the report is concerned, it is marvelous effort by CLA, and before this, I have not seen any such report in Pakistan, particularly for this gig economy workers. Pakistan's location-based platform economy is rapidly developing since previous few years, particularly by the introduction of the ride-hailing, food delivery, and personal home care services by the end of 2015. The population is increasingly relied on these. The rise of location-based platform work has developed a unique set of challenges for labor laws and labor rights framework. Since the platform work does not fall cleanly within the traditional understanding of employment, the working conditions in the current physical gig economy are not up to the mark. Workers are not afforded guaranteed minimum wage, suffers lack of protection due to not being provided social security, sick leave, protective equipment, and the right to organize. Presently, the gig economy workers are usually classified as independent contractors. Therefore, they are ousted from the workforce or being a workman, despite their terms of work resembling much of an employer-employee relationship. Therefore, the gig economy workers are deprived of the labor rights guaranteed in various labor laws of Pakistan applicable to the workers of industrial and commercial sectors. For example, when we see labor rights of the gig workers versus other employees, it is transpired that gig workers have no labor rights at all. They don't have the guaranteed minimum wage, which is presently 25,000 in Pakistan. They are not eligible for overtime pay after 8 hours of work or 48 hours a week. They are not registered with employee social security institution. Thus, they have no access to the healthcare, sickness benefit, employment benefits, paid sick leave, that is 8 in number, paid annual leaves, paid maternity leave. They are not registered with EOBI, thus no old age pension, survivor pensions, or invalidity pensions. They have no right to appointment letter. Platform employer take no responsibility for them. Anti-discrimination protection is not available. They have no right to unionized or collective bargaining, work council, or joint management board. It is the fact that gig economy sector is the easier one to regulate as their work is already documented, more visible and structured than the domestic or home-based workers. That is a standalone law covering the location-based platform workers would be of the utmost benefit, as it would incorporate most of the platform workers' rights instead of referring to other laws as separate laws for the platform for the different sector of the workers also exist, such as the Mines Act, Road Transport Workers Ordinance, Home-Based Workers Act 2013, Punjab Domestic Workers Act 2019, Sindh Women Agriculture Workers Act 2019. These sector-specific employment laws is a very old phenomena in our region. When we see old laws, that is before 1920, we have Factories Act 1881, which was amended in 1901, 1907, and then it was replaced by Indian Factories Act 1911. If we say the modern era, that is after 1920, the Mines Act 1923, Merchant Shipping Act 1923, Factories Act 1934, Dock Labours Act 1934, Dock Workers Regulation Employment Act 1974, Road Transport Workers Ordinance 61, Tea Plantation Labor Ordinance 62, Industrial and Commercial Standing Orders Ordinance 68, Shop and Establishment Ordinance 69, Disabled Person Employment or Employment of Children Act 1991. These are the some laws. All these laws are the sector specific laws. They are applicable to the workers which are actually working in that specific area. So I am the firm opinion that a clear, well-designated labor legislation covering the location-based platform economy would offer the most effective regulation for unchecked platform workers over their treatment of other workers. Thank you very much.
Quickly like to move to the question we have been asked. It's directed to Iftikhar Sahib. Where would you place the role of market in this concept? As market always looks for the most effective ways of doing business, and given excess supply, there would be exploitation. So how would you respond to that?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's a very relevant question. Well, the market has played its role, and the companies have used the market in the best possible way to their own businesses. For example, when you look at that, the platform say, be your own boss, earn thousands, work times you want to work. Yes, it resonates really well with the younger generation, but then it is without any rights, because it has been wrongly presumed that flexibility is equivalent to no rights, that if I'm opting for a flexible employment, it means I'm also doing away with my rights. So yes, I mean, in this way, I mean, I would sometimes I like treating the platforms as well as the human traffickers equally. They try to give you a dream, which is which you can never gain. I mean, yes, I mean, this sounds really good. Like some of the speakers said that when a worker joins a ride-hailing platform and takes loans to buy a car, maybe they are spending their whole resources in buying a car. So they have been sold a dream, but then will they be able to earn that much money to pay back the loan and then have a decent income as well? So yes, the market has been used by the platforms, but not by the workers. Thank you.
Thank you, please. Before concluding the session, let me share a few takeaways quickly with all of you. This was the first report on labor standards in gig economy, and for this purpose, CLR in collaboration with Fairwork Foundation analyzed and scored 7 of the digital labor platforms against Fairwork principles. And the situation seems to be alarming though, since the platforms didn't seem to have performed well on the rating standards when actually compared with the other Fairwork country reports. However, the big ray of hope is that some of the platforms were quite responsive, like FoodPanda making the contract available in the local language and online Gharpar instituting anti-discrimination policy. Similarly, CLR has already drafted legislation for the protection of the workers' rights on this digital platforms, which is actually a big step forward and allows the state to take legislative action. Hopefully in the coming years and the follow-up reports, the situation will improve, which is basically the core purpose of this report also, and the whole project, that is to move towards a fairer platform economy. The report is available online, which is accessible to all. And do follow us further for the further reports in the coming years, where we'll try to cover more platforms and also look at the data for the already covered ones. If you have any questions, you can send it to our website on info@clr.org.pk. Now I would request Akhtar Saab to formally conclude this session.
Thank you very much, everyone. I would like to say thank you to all, particularly our eminent speakers, for your input on this day, and both of the teams at CLR and Fairwork. Richard, particularly to you, who have been with us for this whole year, and the journey of this report was actually quite bumpy. We had, a lot of, I should say, things, going back to same place and then taking it forward. So truly it was a learning experience for us all, and I hope that this report will play a long way to create some some good impression for the gig economy workers here in Pakistan, and we'll be able to take it forward. So once again, thank you very much to you all for sparing some time to join us today. So we are now concluding the event. And, thank you very much once again. If anyone would like to say, Richard, Yasin, if you would like to make some comment, because we are concluding right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's been really great. Thanks very much to the CLR team for all of their work, and to all of our panelists. And we can now conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you very much.